Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering a build that I'm calling the Barbed Blade, which is a title that you'll all agree with me in a moment is very, very clever, and that I want you all to praise me in the comments for. This character is pretty unusual in Baldur's Gate 3 because we focus on retaliation damage. Enemies that hit us will explode in a shower of gore because of our incredible return damage, all the while doing no damage to us because of our resistances, healing, and damage blocking mechanics that will prevent enemies from ever hurting us so we can constantly tank and constantly blow up enemies with the damage that we're doing in return. We also provide solid control spellcasting if the situation calls for it, and excellent melee damage output, while also being the most intimidating barbarian that the world has ever seen. Alright, let's get to the build. I'm using Karlach as the example character here, because while this build will end up taking more levels of Warlock than Barbarian, it just feels more like a Karlach build to me. This is a tanky frontline fighter that wants to be up in the mix, taking hits and giving back as good as it gets, while smashing anything that gets in its way, and that's much more Karlach's domain, though of course this could still work for Will as well. It also, I think, makes a fun alternate universe Karlach, where she embraces her pact with Zariel and ends up being granted infernal powers as a result. Not the direction her character goes in the game under most circumstances, but would be a fun alternate universe take on the character and would fit very well with this build. Of course, if you're building this as a custom character, then the best races to pick are Wood Elf or Half Wood Elf for the bonus movement speed, so you can get adjacent to enemies so they can hit you even sooner and die faster as a result. Or Halfling or Gnome, both of which give you powerful abilities that improve your saving throws. This character is going to have incredible damage resistance to incoming damage, so the only thing you're really worried about is failing a saving throw and losing combat as a result. Gnome gets advantage on mental saves, and Halfling can reroll ones, making that much, much less likely to happen. We're going to be starting as a Barbarian, and there's two good reasons for this. The first is that while this character will often be in rage, and so not concentrating on spells, there will be fights where you would prefer to just play as a spellcaster rather than a melee character, and you're totally capable of doing that. Starting as Barbarian gets you proficiency in Constitution saving throws, so you can more easily maintain concentration on your spells for the fights where you want to use them. The second thing is that starting as a Barbarian just gets you a ton of extra hit points. This character wants to be tanking hits, which means we need the hit points to be able to support incoming damage. We're going to be blocking a lot of that damage, but the more hit points we have, the more hits we can take, and the more damage we can deal back to our enemies. For our ability score selection, we're going to be taking a pretty unusual attribute split for a Barbarian, taking very low strength. This character will not be using its strength to attack, because we will be using our charisma instead. So we are going to take 16 constitution, 16 charisma, 14 dexterity, and 12 wisdom. This gives us decent saving throws, decent initiative and armor class, but also the maximum possible hit points, and high charisma, which we will be using for our attacks and damage once we get Pact of the Blade Warlock, and also for our spells, which we will be casting pretty frequently. This also lets us do something pretty cool for a Barbarian, which is we can take Intimidation as our Barbarian skill. Barbarians just get to take that. And Barbarians get a ton of unique Intimidation lines throughout the game, which tend to have pretty low save DCs because the game assumes that your Barbarian will not have a lot of charisma. So that means that a charisma-focused Barbarian with Intimidation proficiency is going to be incredibly good at getting through those dialogues. All the unique Barbarian dialogues have save DCs of like 12, have skill check DCs of like 12 or something. And so already with our +5 to Intimidation, we're going to pass those very reliably. And then as we continue to level up, we're going to get even better at passing those Barbarian skill checks. So we're going to be able to intimidate anything that we come across very easily. And the Barbarian dialogues are often extremely funny, so getting to use those to optimal effect makes this character super fun to play. No other decisions to make at level 1, so let's move on to level 2. At character level 2, we're going to branch out and immediately take a level of Warlock. This gets us the first of the key components of this build, because we get access to our Warlock spells, including Armor of Agathis. Armor of Agathis, of course, gives you 5 temporary hit points and deals 5 cold damage to any creature that hits you, as long as you have the temporary hit points remaining. And, importantly, is not a concentration spell and lasts all day, so you can cast it and then enter a rage, keeping your Armor of Agathis bonuses while you're fighting in melee as a raging barbarian. So we're going to be taking that, and for our second spell here, we're just going to be taking Hex. This will give us the maximum damage with our Eldritch Blast. I guess I should also mention that on the Nautiloid, because you don't have any strength, so we started as a barbarian, you're going to be fighting with a bow that you could find on the Nautiloid. Just use your dexterity. Once you're level 2, you'll be fighting basically the same way that a normal warlock would with Eldritch Blast, but of course you also have Armor of Agathis, so you can get up into the mix and tank. For our cantrip selection, we're going to be taking Blade Ward, which gives us half incoming damage from bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, which is incredibly important for a character that wants to be tanking. Later on, of course, we will get this effect permanently, but for now, whenever we want to be up in the mix, we can cast Blade Ward on ourselves. This not only increases the amount of damage we can take, it also helps protect the hit points of our Armor of Agathis, keeping it going for longer and allowing us to do more return damage to the enemy. We get Eldritch Blast, of course, because we want to be able to fight in combat, and Eldritch Blast is one of the best spells in the game, so this gives us an incredibly powerful ranged attack. For our subclass, any of the 3 subclasses actually work just fine for this character. Archfey gives us an area of effect Fear, which is pretty powerful if we intend to be up in the middle of all of the enemies, and can win some early game encounters all on its own. The save DC is based on your charisma, so you get to carry this very powerful ability with your high hit point total into the middle of enemies, and still hit them with a very high save DC on Fey Presence. Great Old One is always good. It gives you Mortal Reminder. This character won't be getting a ton of critical hits, because we're not likely to wear too much critical hit gear, but we're still a barbarian, meaning we'll have reckless attack to attack constantly with advantage, which gets you more critical hits and can frighten lots of enemies. Finally, Fiend gives you the best spell list, and the Dark One's Blessing ability, which gives you temporary hit points whenever you kill an enemy. Now, granted, these temporary hit points don't interact super favorably with Armor of Agathis, because they won't restore Armor of Agathis hit points, but they're still a useful tool for a character that wants to be up in the mix of things, fighting in melee combat and killing lots of enemies with our incredible retaliation damage. So these aren't totally worthless, and the Fiend also has the best spell list for this character. So I think that the Fiend is slightly the strongest choice, but any of the 3 Warlock subclasses are pretty good. Let's just make sure we've got the right spells here, and then go on to level 3. At character level 3, we get to take our second level of Warlock, getting us another spell, and the spell that we are going to take here is the other key component of this build, which is Hellish Rebuke. Hellish Rebuke is a reaction spell, and all reaction spells in Baldur's Gate 3 can be cast while raging. For whatever reason, Rage's inability to cast spells or Barbarian's inability to cast spells while raging does not apply to reactions. So Shield, Hellish Rebuke, Counterspell, all can be cast while raging, meaning that this character, when you get hit by an enemy, deals Armor of Agathis damage back to them, and can use their reaction to deal Hellish Rebuke damage back to them for a tremendous burst of damage in return. So this character can both tank incredibly well, and whenever it gets hit, deals a ludicrous amount of damage back to the enemy. We're going to see how high this damage scales as we continue to level, because Hellish Rebuke's damage is so excellent if you are consistently getting hit. For our Eldritch Invocations, we're a Warlock, so we're going to take Agonizing Blast to increase the damage of our Eldritch Blast. At this level, we still aren't able to make melee attacks, because we don't have Pact of the Blade yet, so we're still primarily using our Agonizing Blast for combat, and we're going to take Devil's Sight, because as a Warlock, one of the best things that you get to do is abuse darkness. This character is no exception, being able to make yourself completely immune to ranged attacks, give all enemies disadvantage on their attacks, and you advantage on all of your attacks, is just as powerful as always, and this lets you also play a ranged damage dealer in any combat where you don't want to be up in the mix against enemies. Say they have there's a hazardous location that you have to fight in, or an enemy who's just too dangerous to get into melee with. We don't need to replace a spell because we picked all the perfect spells, so let's go to level 4. At character level 4, we are taking our 3rd level of Warlock, and of course we are taking as our Pact boon, the Pact of the Blade. That's the whole thing that makes this character tick, is that with Pact of the Blade Warlock, you can bind your main hand weapon in order to be your Pact weapon, and then you get to attack with it using your charisma instead of your strength. So now we're a barbarian who bases their attacks off of charisma, so we get all of the great barbarian goodies in terms of dealing damage, but also use our charisma for attacking damage, have high spell save DCs for when we want to cast spells, and get access to the retaliation damage that we've already discussed. For our level 2 spell, we're of course going to pick up Darkness. It is just too good to pass up on when you're when you are a warlock. This combination is just one of the most powerful things that you can do in Honor Mode, the Darkness plus Devil's Sight combination, and this character is no exception. So not only do we bring really powerful damage and retaliation and tanking to the table, we also bring the Broken Darkness mechanics, which are of course excellent for any party. At character level 5, we get our 4th level of Warlock, and we get access to our first feat. The feat that we're going to take here is just an ability improvement to raise our charisma so that we hit with our attacks more often, and of course so that our spells that have saving throws land more frequently. If you wanted to, also, you could start with 17 charisma and use Ethel's Hair to get to 18, and then your first feat could be Great Weapon Master for more damage with your weapon attacks, or Alert, which of course is excellent on every Honor Mode character, so either of those would be excellent options as well if you have Ethel's Hair spare for this character, or if you know that you're going to be able to get the Mirror in order to raise your charisma. Those are totally reasonable options as well, but for this version of the character, we're just going to go ahead and take an ability improvement to go to 18 charisma. For our cantrip selection at this level, we're going to take Friends. This gives us advantage on our dialogue checks, which this character is getting even better at. Another option, of course, is always Minor Illusion if the character needs access to that, or if your party needs access to that. Every party should have Minor Illusion because you can use it to split enemies away from their allies, group them up for AoE attacks, or distract them while you steal stuff. Tons and tons of utility from this cantrip, but Friends is going to lean more into the idea of being the most intimidating barbarian in the world, so that's what we're going to grab. For our spell selection at this level, we're going to go back for a level 1 spell, and that level 1 spell is Command. Command is one of the benefits of being a Fiend Warlock, because this is just an incredible spell. As a Warlock, it automatically uses your high-level spell slots, so at this level we get to command 2 creatures, and at later levels we're going to get to command even more creatures. And you can cast Command, it's not concentration, so you can cast Command and then Rage in the same turn, using Command to lock down enemies before combat really starts, while you go into a Rage and then can continue beating on them in future turns, with your excellent melee damage and all the retaliation damage that you get if they do manage to get back up and fight back. At character level 6, we're going to take our 5th level of Warlock, because as a Pact of the Blade Warlock, that gets us extra attack, which is of course incredibly important for any character that's making melee attacks, and this character will be making a ton of melee attacks. It also gets us 3rd level Warlock spells, which improves our Armor of Agathis up to 15 temporary hit points and 15 return damage, and improves our Hellish Rebuke up to 4d10 return damage, which means that we're doing an average of 37 return damage whenever an enemy hits us, and we have a reaction and a spell slot to spare. That's enough to basically fry most enemies at this level in combination with our really powerful melee attacks. So we're already doing a great deal of return damage at this level, which is why we want to get these 3rd level spell slots as soon as possible. Being 3rd level, being a Warlock with 3rd level spells also gets us access to a bunch of great options. At this level, you have a lot of different choices, and it'll depend a little bit on your playstyle with this character. You could take Hunger of Hadar. This is always an incredible spell, but because it is concentration, you won't be able to keep it up in combats where you're raging. So you only really want Hunger of Hadar if the character is frequently acting just as a spellcaster more than as a melee character and tank, which may be the case depending on your party composition. You could also take Fireball just for a bunch of damage. This doesn't require concentration, so just like Command, you can start off a fight with Fireball and then entering a rage, or of course you could take Counterspell. I'm going to recommend that this character take Fireball at this level. Counterspell is going to be pretty important later on, but we'll have time to grab that. So Fireball is going to let us contribute area of effect damage. Lowering enemies' health with a Fireball is also really convenient for this character, because even if a bunch of enemies live at 20, 30, 40 HP, we can then just kill them with our retaliation damage plus our melee attacks pretty easily. So the ability to lower the health thresholds of a lot of the encounters by having a giant area of effect damage spell is very useful for this character. For our Eldritch Invocation, we have a lot of different options. The most natural one is Repelling Blast, still very, very useful for any Warlock, but again, Eldritch Blasts are only usable when you're not raging, so the more you are wading into melee combat, the less benefit you're going to get from this ability. You could also take Beguiling Influence to gain proficiency in Persuasion and Deception, and just make this character into a totally well-rounded, all-round party face. Either of those are going to be really good. I'm going to recommend taking Beguiling Influence because I think while Repelling Blast is very good in combat and you will have opportunities to use it, this character will be, in the next couple levels, entering a state where you really want to be wading into melee combat and not casting Eldritch Blasts. So just being able to be an excellent party face is really nice for your party as a whole, and you won't get as much value from Repelling Blast. Character level 7. We are leaving Warlock and going back to Barbarian. This gets us Reckless Attack, which is both really useful for landing our attacks. Of course, any character can use advantage on its attacks, but also really useful for this character that actively wants to get hit. In Baldur's Gate 3, the AI prioritizes which characters it's attacking, in part by how easy it is for them to land attacks on that character. So giving them advantage on their attack rolls against you means they're very likely to focus their attacks on this character, taking Armor of Agathys damage and Hellish Rebuke damage in return. Reckless Attack is therefore really useful for this character, and I recommend using it at basically every single turn of every combat, so that you can constantly be landing your attacks, getting more critical hits as well with the advantage, and also causing enemies to more highly prioritize attacking you and take retaliation damage in response. At character level 8, we are taking our third level of Barbarian, so that we can take the Wildheart Barbarian subclass and get access to the Bearheart Rage. Bearheart Rage gives you damage resistance to every type of damage except for psychic damage. So now all incoming damage from enemies will be halved, and then reduced further, of course, by any flat damage reduction that we have from items, which is something that we're going to prioritize pretty heavily. And of course, reduced further by our temporary hit points from Armor of Agathys. This means our Armor of Agathys will go much, much further before breaking, before enemies have dealt enough damage to get through our Armor of Agathys temp HP, and this character can also just tank a lot more. It also makes any healing that we have for after our Armor of Agathys breaks and we're taking damage to our hit points twice as effective. And since this character will be doing a lot of healing with our itemization, that is also going to be incredibly powerful. Taking half damage from everything that enemies do is just on the face of it really, really good. I don't know that this needs a ton of explanation, but for a character that is intending to constantly be taking hits, it's even better, and it multiplies extremely well with all of the other things that we're doing. So this character's synergies are now, at level 8, fully and completely online. Character level 9, we actually have a choice to make. We could take our 4th level of Barbarian for a second feat, and then take 3 more levels of Warlock, ending with 4 levels of Barbarian and 8 in Warlock to get us 3 total feats by the end of the game. Or we could go back to Warlock in order to take 9 total levels of Warlock and end with higher level spell slots. Either of these options are excellent, and I think you can do either depending on which you value more highly. For this build, I'm going to recommend going with more levels of Warlock, because that will get us 5th level spells, which improves our Armor of Agathis, it improves our Hellish Rebukes, so it just means that our retaliation damage does even more damage, and it also gives us access to another couple spells that are really, really powerful options to have as well. So more levels of Warlock, I think, is overall the slightly stronger direction, but either will work really well, and the 4-8 split is also excellent, especially if you want this character to do more melee damage with higher Charisma and Great Weapon Master, or if you are struggling with Initiative and want to pick up Alert. For the 6th level of Warlock here, we also get Dark One's Own Luck, allowing us to add a D10 to our ability checks. That includes our Barbarian Intimidation Dialogue checks, which, as I've previously mentioned, we are incredible at. So now this character is just the most intimidating character on the planet. With high charisma, the Barbarian Intimidate special effects that lower the difficulty class of all your Intimidate rolls, and Dark One's Own Luck to be even better at rolling Intimidate checks. For our spell selection at this level, we're going to pick up Counterspell. It's really important to have this in the end game, and remember this is a reaction, so can be cast while raging. It's weird that that's true, but it is true for Baldur's Gate 3. And we could also, at this point, go back and replace a spell. If there's one we're not using, most likely Hex, because we are no longer concentrating on any effect, we can go back and pick up something like Hunger of Hadar, Misty Step. Any of those would be great as concentration spells. We could take Scorching Ray if you want a single target damage option. I'm going to recommend just grabbing Misty Step because it's an important mobility tool for every character to have, and you can have it in an emergency, or Hunger of Hadar for the combats where your character isn't in rage and so can actually concentrate on a spell. Level 10. We're going to take our 7th level of Warlock, getting 4th level spells. At this point, we are going to pick up Fire Shield, which is going to give us even more opportunities for retaliation damage. Now, this does have a little bit of a conflict. This character only gets 2 Warlock spell slots per short rest, so unless you are using something that restores your spell slots, you won't be able to cast Fire Shield, Armor of Agathis, and Hellish Rebuke all in the same short rest. Especially not if you're using your other spells like Command or Fireball, but either you can restore your spell slots with the items and potions and stuff that let you restore spell slots, or you can have Armor of Agathis that just lasts from a previous short rest if enemies haven't done enough damage to overcome the total hit points of your Armor of Agathis. Fire Shield gives you even more return damage, so our return damage is now 20 from Armor of Agathis, 5d10 from Hellish Rebuke with a 4th level Hellish Rebuke, and 2d8 from the Fire Shield every single time we get hit, for an incredible amount of return damage to an enemy. For Eldritch Invocation at this level, there's really not that much that we are going to be using at this point. You can take Confusion, which does give you a powerful concentration control option. That's something that this character currently is missing because we didn't pick up Hunger of Hadar. If you did grab Hunger of Hadar, you won't need this as much. None of these are going to be super powerful for this build, so you can kind of grab, you could also go back for Repelling Blast if you want the utility of being able to push enemies around. I'm going to suggest taking Dreadful Word because it does give you a powerful concentration control option for if there's a combat where you want to act more as a spellcaster and less as a melee character. At level 11, with our 8th level of Warlock, we are going to take another spell slot here, and at this point you should have a pretty good idea of what your party is missing. You can, again, grab Hunger of Hadar, you can take Wall of Fire for more concentration-based damage. Hunger of Hadar in general is going to be better than that, or you can go back for something like Scorching Ray, just to have a ranged damaging option. Or like invisibility for whatever utility. Your spell selection at this level is a little more marginal. You won't be using it that often because mostly you're going to be charging into melee. For our feat at this level, there's a couple different options. We could either take an ability improvement to boost our charisma, but at this point we now have access to the gear and story events that increase our charisma. So it's less critical for us to boost our charisma to 20 at this point in the game. So I'm going to recommend just taking Great Weapon Master. We now also have Reckless Attack, which we didn't have last time we selected a feat, so this will just increase our damage output dramatically. We won't be missing our attacks that often, even with the -5 penalty, because we have Reckless Attack. So the +10 damage is going to still be very, very valuable at this point in the game. The feat order here can also depend a bit on whether you have Bless in your party. You might want to take Great Weapon Master earlier, if you have a character that's casting Bless, or a buff on heal character that's blessing your party. This character can also bless itself with the buff on heal items, and that makes Great Weapon Master more appealing, but this will just increase our damage output significantly. Finally, at character level 12, we get our 9th level of Warlock and our 5th level spells. None of the Warlock 5th level spells are incredibly helpful, though both Flame Strike and Cone of Cold give us great damage options if we just need better AoE damage. In general, you don't want to get enemies wet with this build because it will give them damage resistance against Hellish Rebuke, but in combats where they are wet for whatever reason, it's nice to have a bunch of cold damage that can then be doubled by the wet condition. So having Cone of Cold, I think, and is generally speaking going to be more useful than having Flame Strike, because if an enemy gets wet because you're fighting in water, or just because it's the right thing to do for that combat, for the fanfiction and the memes, then you can blast them with Cone of Cold for double damage. For our Eldritch Invocation, though, we get to take Minions of Chaos, which gives us Conjure Elemental. This lets us spend one of our short rest Warlock spell slots for a long rest benefit, conjuring a summon that can follow us around all day. So now our first short rest of the day could be Armor of Agathys plus Conjure Elemental, and then later short rests we have our very powerful damaging spells, because those spell effects last all day. All of this gives the character a tremendous amount of utility and a bunch of damage that it brings to the party, while also being nigh impossible to kill. Alright, my friends, that is the Barbed Blade, but of course, we can make the character more powerful with items, so let's talk about those. For items for this character, one of the great things about playing this character is that it has almost no specific item requirements, and so can go into pretty much any party without interfering with the itemization that your other party members need. Nevertheless, there's definitely some items that can make the character even more powerful, so of course, let's go over what those are. Firstly, we're going to want a good piece of armor that reduces incoming damage. Any flat damage reduction that we have is going to combine extremely well with the damage resistance that we get from Bear Totem Barbarian, because it will have incoming damage and then apply the flat damage reduction, reducing an even greater percent of it and helping protect our Armor of Agathys even further. In the early game, this is going to be the Adamantine Scale Mail, which has two really great effects for this character. It reduces incoming damage by 1, and causes enemies to be reeling when they hit you, so they take even more debuffs when they hit you, but also prevents enemies from landing critical hits on you. This is really important when you are reckless attacking, because when enemies attack you with advantage, they have twice as many chances to critically hit you. Preventing critical hits entirely is super powerful for this character, because it means that you are much less likely to have your damage reduction just broken through and your Armor of Agathys hit points broken. It also, because of how the game calculates enemies rerolling critical hits, makes them slightly less likely to hit you, which is kind of fun in and of itself. We will also, later on in the game, you can then switch to the Bone Spike Garb, which reduces incoming damage by 2 and does even more retaliation damage, or you can just stick with the Adamantine Scale Mail. Either of these are viable endgame options. You do have to be a little careful with the Bone Spike Garb, though, because it gives you temporary HP when you rage. If you have fewer than 15 hit points remaining on your Armor of Agathys, when this triggers, it will overwrite it, and you'll lose the Armor of Agathys effect. So you do have to be a little careful not to have the Bone Spike Garb on and rage if you still want Armor of Agathys and have taken a bunch of damage previously in that Armor of Agathys instance. In addition to that, since we have so much damage reduction and we want to be taking damage and dealing damage back to enemies, we want a weapon that provides a bunch of healing, and so I recommend the Sword of Chaos. This lets us heal for 1d6 every time we hit an enemy, and we can maximize that 1d6 to a full 6 with the Periaptive Wound Closure. Healing for 12 HP every turn means even if enemies get through our damage reduction, break through our Armor of Agathis temporary hit points, we're going to be constantly able to keep ourselves in fighting form by constantly gaining at least 10 hit points every turn, more of course if we have haste or other effects that let us attack more frequently. We're going to want a pair of gloves that give us more damage, and obviously the best in slot in the end game is going to be the Helldusk gloves, but any gloves that increase your damage output are great. We are making a lot of melee attacks. And for cloaks, you're going to want the Flesh Melter cloak, which deals 1d4 acid damage on retaliation against melee enemies to just add even more retaliation damage to the character. We, later on, are going to want the Birthright Hat when you get access to this to bring our charisma up to 20 if we didn't take an ability score improvement to do that, or even higher, of course. And, of course, you can use the Mirror of Loss to raise your charisma even further. Alternatively, you can just use an Elixir of Cloud Giant Strength to have 27 Strength. In the end game, this will be better than any amount of Charisma that you can get, so this character can have high Charisma for its spells and Hellish Rebukes and whatever, but still just hit like a truck because of the Elixir of Cloud Giant Strength. Finally, this character does have very weak initiative rolls, so you will want to invest some gear that improves your initiative onto this character. Any gear that improves your initiative is of course very valuable to your party, but this character should be a priority for getting it because our initiative rolls are very low since we didn't take alert and only have 14 dexterity. Other than that, you can fill things out with whatever gear your party members don't need. Increase your damage, your initiative, and your saving throws. Those are the priorities for this character, but it mostly operates quite independently of gear, other than the ones that I've already mentioned. Alright, my friends, I hope that you have enjoyed this look at the Barbed Blade. This character is a blast to play, plays very differently than a lot of other Baldur's Gate 3 characters, because you actively want to take hits and return damage to enemies. You actively want to take damage and heal that damage back, and those are things that normally Honor Mode characters don't want to do. So it's really fun, and I hope that you enjoy trying this one out yourselves. As always, if you have enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave a comment and hit like. Helps me out a ton with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, my friends. I will catch you next time.